Billionaire was about to propose to another woman, but a trip with his daughter's nanny changed his destiny. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The signature was worth $47 million, but Nathaniel Ashford barely glanced at the contract before signing his name with the same precision he'd used for the past 15 years. His Mont Blanc pen moved across the paper in fluid strokes while his assistant, Harrison, shuffled through the next stack of documents, waiting for approval. The Meridian acquisition is complete, sir. Legal wants to schedule the integration meeting for Thursday. Harrison's voice carried the same efficient monotone that had made him invaluable. No unnecessary emotions, no wasted words. Nathaniel nodded, already reaching for his phone to check Clara's latest message. Darling, the caterer confirmed the menu for Friday. Everything is falling perfectly into place. He typed back a brief acknowledgement, his thumb moving with practiced detachment. Friday, the engagement dinner. Another milestone in his carefully constructed life. At 40, Nathaniel had learned that predictability was power. Since Margaret's death 3 years ago, he'd rebuilt his world on foundations of logic and control. No chaos, no surprises, no room for the kind of devastating loss that had once brought him to his knees in a hospital corridor, clutching a 5-year-old's hand while doctors delivered news that shattered everything he thought he knew about forever. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Ashford, your 4 o'clock is here. Send them up. He straightened his tie, a gesture that had become as automatic as breathing. Every thread in place, every detail managed, every possible variable accounted for. That's when he heard it. Laughter. Pure, unguarded, childlike laughter, echoing from somewhere deep in the mansion's east wing. The sound pierced through the insulated walls of his home office like sunlight through storm clouds, and for a moment, Nathaniel found himself frozen, his hands still positioned at his throat. Sophie, his daughter's laughter was as foreign to him as a stranger's voice. When was the last time he'd heard her laugh like that? When was the last time he'd been in the same room when she laughed at all? The business meeting proceeded with its usual efficiency. Quarterly reports, market projections, strategic recommend. Nathaniel participated with his trademark focus. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. That sound kept playing in his mind like a song he couldn't quite remember, but couldn't forget. We'll reconvene next Tuesday, he concluded, standing to signal the meeting's end. The executives filed out with respectful nods and firm handshakes, leaving him alone with the echo of numbers and profit margins that suddenly felt hollow. Nathaniel walked to his window, looking out over the perfectly manicured grounds of his estate. Somewhere in this house, his daughter was living a life he barely witnessed. She had meals he didn't share, played games he didn't know, and apparently found joy in moments he'd never been part of. His phone buzzed. Clara again. Should we discuss the honeymoon destination tonight? I've been researching resorts in Santorini. He stared at the message, Clara's face materializing in his mind. Elegant, composed, socially immaculate. She would make a perfect wife for a man like him. She understood his world, his priorities, his need for order. She would never surprise him, never challenge the careful boundaries he'd constructed around his heart. But as he started to type his response, that laughter echoed through the hallway again, followed by an unfamiliar female voice, warm, animated, completely different from the measured tones of the governesses and tutors who usually populated his home. Sophie, wait, you can't run through the house with muddy shoes. But Isa, look what I found. Sophie's voice sparkled with excitement. It's a ladybug. She needs a house. Isa. Nathaniel frowned. He didn't recognize the name. When had they hired a new caregiver? How had such a decision been made without his approval? He found himself moving toward his office door, drawn by an impulse he couldn't quite name. Through the crack, he caught a glimpse of Sophie racing down the marble hallway, her usually pristine dress spotted with grass stains, her carefully braided hair coming loose in wild tendrils. Behind her, a young woman with auburn hair and an amused expression followed at a more measured pace. The woman, I was nothing like the professional staff he was accustomed to. She wore simple jeans and a soft sweater, and she moved through his formal home like she belonged in gardens rather than gilded corridors. There was something unguarded about her, something that made the space around her feel less like a museum and more like a home. Sophie Ashford, if your father sees those muddy footprints, Isla began, but her voice held laughter rather than true concern. Daddy's always in meetings. Sophie replied. It matter-of-factly, crouching beside a potted plant to create what appeared to be a miniature habitat for her ladybug friend. He won't see. The casual dismissal in his daughter's voice hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. To Sophie, his absence wasn't painful or notable. It was simply fact. He was the man who lived in the same house, but inhabited a completely different world. Nathaniel stepped back from the door, his carefully controlled composure wavering. Through the gap, he watched Isla kneel beside Sophie, genuinely interested in the elaborate ladybug house taking shape among the orchid stems. She wasn't checking her watch or redirecting Sophie toward more appropriate activities. She was simply present. His phone buzzed again. Clara, the resort research, his perfectly planned future. But for the first time in 3 years, Nathaniel found himself wondering, what if perfect wasn't the same as right? What if control wasn't the same as living? As Sophie's laughter filled the hallway once more, Nathaniel made a decision that would change everything, though he didn't know it yet. And in that moment, watching a stranger bring joy to his daughter in ways he'd forgotten were possible, one question echoed in his mind. Who was this woman? And why did she make his carefully ordered world suddenly feel like a beautiful prison? The mahogany desk that had witnessed countless million-dollar deals suddenly felt too small as Nathaniel spread out travel brochures, like battle plans, to Scanyani, the rolling hills he'd visited once during his MBA program back when Margaret was still alive and the world held different possibilities. Sir Harrison appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, his expression betraying the slightest confusion. In 15 years, Nathaniel had never requested vacation research during business hours. The Florence accommodations you requested, Villa Monte Rosa, appears to meet all your specifications. Nathaniel nodded, studying photos of sun-drenched terraces and olive groves. Book it for 10 days starting this weekend. This weekend, Harrison's professional composure cracked slightly. But sir, you have the Marson Industries presentation on Monday and the Federal Reserve meeting on Wednesday, and reschedule everything. The words came out more firmly than Nathaniel had intended. This is non-negotiable. What he didn't say, what he couldn't say, was that Clara's text about honeymoon destinations had triggered something primal in him. The realization that he was about to propose marriage to a woman he'd never seen laugh the way Sophie had laughed in that hallway, the understanding that he was choosing a life partner based on spreadsheet compatibility rather than whatever it was that made his chest tighten when he heard his daughter's uninhibited joy. The intercom buzzed. Mr. Ashford, Mrs. Petton, is here with the household reports. Eleanor Petton had been his head housekeeper for 8 years, a woman whose efficiency rivaled his own. She entered with her usual stack of perfectly organized files, but today, Nathaniel found himself studying her face, looking for clues about decisions made without his input. Mrs. Petton, I need to ask about Sophie's new caregiver. Elilana's eyebrows rose slightly. Isa Bennett, sir. She's been with us for 3 weeks now. Excellent references from the Carmichael family in Boston. Degree in child psychology from Northwestern. Specializes in emotional development for children who've experienced trauma. Trauma. The word hit him like cold water. Is that what Sophie was dealing with? Had he been so focused on providing stability that he'd missed his daughter's need for healing? I wasn't aware we were hiring new staff. Your instructions have always been to handle domestic matters without involving you, sir. Miss Bennet came highly recommended when Sophie's previous governess relocated to London. Eleanor paused, her tone gentler. If I may say so, the change has been remarkable. Sophie has been happier, because of a stranger. I've decided to take Sophie to Italy for a few days. Miss Bennet will accompany us to ensure continuity of care. Elilona Unk's surprise was evident. You're taking a vacation, sir? I'm spending time with my daughter. The words felt foreign in his mouth, but not unpleasant. Please inform Miss Bennet that she should pack for 10 days in Tuscany. We leave Saturday morning. After Eleanor departed, Nathaniel found himself walking through his home with unfamiliar awareness. How long had it been since he'd really looked at the spaces Sophie inhabited? Her playroom, with its expensive toys arranged in pristine order. Her bedroom, decorated by professional designers in muted pastels that suggested calm rather than joy. He paused outside the conservatory where voices drifted through the partially open door. Tell me about the butterfly, Isa. Sophie's voice carried a wonder he'd forgotten children could possess. Well, She starts as something completely different, a caterpillar who thinks crawling is all there is to life, but then she wraps herself up tight. Everything goes dark, and she has to trust that something beautiful is waiting on the other side. Does it hurt, the changing? I think it might, but maybe the hurt is worth it when you discover you had wings all along. Nathaniel stood frozen in the hallway, struck by the metaphor's unexpected depth. Through the crack in the door, he could see Isla sitting cross-legged on the floor, completely focused on Sophie, while his daughter cradled a picture book-like treasure. This was what he'd been missing. Not just Sophie's laughter, but her questions, her curiosity, her incredible capacity to find magic in ordinary moments. His phone rang, shattering the spell. Clara's name flashed on the screen. Darling, I've been thinking about Friday's dinner. Perhaps we should invite the Weatherbys. Jonathan's connections at the Fed could be valuable for your September merger. Clara, I need to postpone Friday. Silence, then postpone our engagement dinner. I'm taking Sophie on a trip. Some quality time before what? Before he married a woman who saw everything, including their engagement, as a networking opportunity. Nathaniel, this is very unlike you. You've never been impulsive about your schedule. Maybe that's the problem. Another pause. I don't understand. I'm not sure I do either, but I need to figure some things out. After ending the call, Nathaniel realized he was still standing outside the conservatory, still listening to the sound of his daughter's world expanding, under the gentle guidance of a woman who'd appeared in their lives like an answered prayer. He hadn't known he was praying. He pushed the door open. Daddy. Sophie looked up with genuine surprise, not the careful politeness he'd grown accustomed to. Isa was telling me about butterflies. I heard. He found himself sitting on the floor, something he couldn't remember doing in years. Miss Bennet, I hope you have a valid passport. Isa's green eyes met his confusion and curiosity flickering across her features. I do, sir. Why? Because you're coming to Italy with us. Sophie will need consistency while we're away. Italy. Sophie's voice rose with excitement. Like where the Leaning Tower is, exactly like that. Nathaniel looked at Isla, noting how she absorbed Sophie's joy without trying to contain it. We leave Saturday. I hope you don't mind short notice. Isa tilted her head, studying him with indirectness that was both unsettling and oddly refreshing. May I ask what changed your mind about taking a vacation? The honest answer was too complicated for a moment like this. Instead, he said, I realized I don't know enough about butterflies. Sophie giggled, a sound that seemed to surprise even her. Daddy's funny, as Nathaniel looked at his daughter's delighted face. Then, at Ida's knowing smile, one thought crystallized with startling clarity. This trip was either going to save him or completely destroy the carefully controlled life he'd built. And for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't sure which outcome scared him more. The private jet touched down in Florence, just as the Tuscan sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Nathaniel checked his phone automatically. 3 missed calls from Clara, 17 unread emails, marked urgent, and a text from Harrison about the Morrison deal requiring immediate attention. Daddy, look, the houses have orange roofs. Sophie's face was pressed against the window, her breath fogging the glass as she pointed at the terracotta-tiled buildings scattered across the rolling hills. They're called terracotta tiles, Nathaniel found himself explaining, surprised by his own patience. When had he last taken time to answer one of Sophie's observations, instead of redirecting her to ask the gov? Isa sat across the aisle, her attention split between Sophie's excitement and the landscape unfolding below. She'd packed light, a single leather bag that looked well-traveled, clothes that suggested comfort over fashion. Everything about her seemed to whisper that she belonged in places where life happened naturally, not in carefully orchestrated environments like his usual world. The drive to Villamontoa wound through countryside that seemed designed to slow time itself. Olive groves stretched toward distant hills, dotted with ancient stone farmhouses that had weathered centuries without losing their grace. Nathaniel found his laptop closed on his knees, forgotten as he watched Sophie's wonder reflect in the car window. Is this where we're staying? Sophie gasped as their car turned through wrought iron gates toward a honeycombed villa that seemed to grow from the hillside itself. Villa Monterosa was exactly what Nathaniel had ordered. Luxurious but not ostentatious, private but not isolated, with grounds that would give Sophie space to explore safely. What he hadn't anticipated was how the setting would make his usual urgencies seem not just unnecessary, but almost absurd. The villa's caretaker, Yeppy, greeted them with warmth that felt genuine rather than professional. Benvenue, welcome the little Signorina. She will love the garden. Many butterflies this time of year. Sophie looked immediately to Ella, who smiled and nodded. Butterflies need flowers, and flowers need time to grow properly, just like people. As their bags were carried inside, Nathaniel's phone buzzed again. Clara, he almost answered, then watched Sophie skip toward a fountain, where water danced in the early evening light. And something made him slide the phone back into his pocket without looking at the screen. The chef has prepared dinner for 8 o'clock, Yepa announced. But if the little one is hungry now, actually Isla interjected gently. Might we explore the grounds first? Sophie's been sitting for a long time, and children her age need to move before they can settle. Sophie nodded eagerly, already tugging at her travel shoes. Can we see everything, Daddy? Please. Nathaniel looked at his watch. 6:30. Back home. This would be when he reviewed the day's reports, returned calls, prepared for tomorrow's challenges. Here, with his daughter's hopeful face turned toward his, those obligations felt like echoes from someone else's life. Lead the way. The gardens were a revelation. Not the manicured perfection he was accustomed to, but something more organic. Lavender plants that hummed with bees, grapevines heavy with fruit, herbs that released their fragrance when Sophie's small hands brushed against them. Smell this, Daddy. Sophie thrust a sprig of rosemary toward him. It's like Christmas and cooking and something happy, all mixed together. Nathaniel inhaled, and for a moment, he was transported back to Margaret's kitchen, watching her prepare his favorite meal while Sophie played with wooden spoons on the floor. The memory hit him with unexpected force, not the sharp pain of loss he'd grown accustomed to, but something warmer, gratitude perhaps, for having had something so beautiful to lose. Your daughter has wonderful instincts, Isla observed, watching Sophie examine a cluster of grapes with scientific intensity. She's naturally curious about how things grow, how they change, how they become what they're meant to be. She gets that from her mother. The words came out before Nathaniel could edit them, carrying more vulnerability than he'd intended. Isa glanced at him, her expression softening. Tell me about her, Margaret. Nathaniel found himself sitting on a stone bench, Sophie's laughter providing a soundtrack as she chased fireflies beginning to emerge in the gathering dusk. She was spontaneous. The kind of person who'd decide at 9 p.m. that we needed to see the sunrise from the beach. So we'd drive all night just to watch the world wake up. That sounds wonderful. It was. He paused, watching Isola's genuine interest. After she died, I thought the answer was structure, predictability. If I could control enough variables, maybe we'd be safe from that kind of loss again. And how's that working for you? The question was gentle but direct, and Nathaniel found himself actually considering it instead of deflecting. I'm not sure anymore. This afternoon, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I heard Sophie laugh the way she laughed yesterday. Really laugh, not just polite amusement. Children need both. Isa, settling beside him on the bench, structure gives them security, but spontaneity gives them joy. The trick is finding balance. Is that what you do? Find balance. I try to help children find their own balance. Every child is different. Sophie's incredibly bright, but she's also been protecting herself, keeping safe by not expecting too much presence from the adults in her life. The observation stung because it was true. She told you that she didn't have to. Children show you everything if you know how to look. Isa watched Sophie, who had discovered a small gecko and was trying to coax it onto her palm. She's hungry for connection, but she's learned not to ask for it directly. Nathaniel's phone buzzed again. Clara's fourth call. This time, he looked at the screen and made a conscious decision to decline it. Important call, Ela asked. It was supposed to be. He found himself studying Isola's profile in the fading light. Can I ask you something? What made you want to work with children? Honestly, I think I was a lot like Sophie once, lost a parent young, had well-meaning adults try to fix me with schedules and appropriate activities. It took someone like me to show me that healing isn't about forgetting or controlling. It's about learning to be present again. As if summoned by their conversation, Sophie appeared breathlessly before them. Dirt on her knees and pure delight on her face. Look, I made a friend. The gecko perched calmly on her palm, seemingly as charmed by Sophie as everyone else who spent time with her. He's not scared, Sophie marveled. That's because you're being gentle, Isa explained. Sometimes the most wonderful things happen when we're patient and present instead of trying to control everything. Sophie looked directly at Nathaniel. Are you being present, too, Daddy? The question, so innocent and so pointed, hit him like revelation. When was the last time he'd been truly present for anything? When had he stopped experiencing moments and started managing them? I'm learning, he said, and meant it. As they walked back toward the villa, Sophie's hand slipping naturally into his, Nathaniel realized something had shifted in the space of a single evening. Clara's calls remained unanswered. His emails sat unread. His carefully scheduled life waited on pause. And for the first time in 3 years, that felt exactly right. Sun hadn't fully risen when Nathaniel found himself wide awake, staring at the ceiling of his villa bedroom. Back home, 500 a.m. meant reviewing market reports and preparing for the day's conquests. Here, with Italian countryside silence broken only by distant birdsong, the absence of his usual urgency felt almost foreign. He padded to the window in bare feet. When was the last time he'd walked anywhere without dress shoes? And discovered Sophie already in the garden below, still in her pajamas. Crouched beside a patch of wildflowers with the focused intensity of a scientist making groundbreaking discoveries, she wasn't alone. Issa sat cross-legged in the dewy grass, her auburn hair catching the early light. Completely unbothered by the dampness seeping through her simple cotton pants, she was showing Sophie something in her palm. Seeds, perhaps, or a small insect that had caught the child's fascination. If you're very still, Issa's voice drifted up to his window. You can watch her unfold her wings, but if we try to hurry her, she might break, Sophie finished solemnly. Like people. Exactly like people. Nathaniel found himself pulling on clothes without his usual methodical precision, jeans instead of pressed slacks, a simple white shirt instead of tailored formality. As he made his way downstairs, his phone buzzed with its familiar morning symphony of notifications. Clara's name appeared twice among the messages. Darling, we need to discuss Friday's postponement. People are asking questions. I've rescheduled with the caterer, but the Weatherbees are confused about the sudden change. He stared at the messages, trying to summon his usual sense of obligation. Instead, he found himself thinking about butterfly wings and the danger of hurrying delicate transformations. Good morning, Mr. Ashford. Yeppie appeared with a tray of espresso and warm pastries, his weathered face creased with genuine welcome. The little Signorina, she is already making friends with the garden. So, I see. Nathaniel accepted the coffee, gratefully, savoring the rich aroma that seemed more authentic than anything he'd tasted in months. How long have they been out there? Since the sun touched the hills. Miss Issa, she understands that children learn better when their hands are dirty and their hearts are light. See, through the kitchen window, Nathaniel watched Sophie carefully transplant something tiny into a small pot while Isla guided her hands with infinite patience. There was something almost sacred about their focus, their gentle collaboration with nature's rhythms. Josip, do you have children? 3, all grown now with bambini of their own. The older man's expression grew thoughtful. I learned long ago that the best gift we give children is not what we buy them, but how present we are when they discover the world. Present. That word again. Nathaniel took his coffee outside, approaching the garden where his daughter and her caregiver worked in comfortable harmony. Sophie looked up as his shadow fell across their project, her face lighting with the kind of unguarded joy he was beginning to recognize, but still felt unworthy of receiving. Daddy, look what we're growing. She held up a tiny pot containing what appeared to be a single green sprout, as proud as if she'd just created life itself. What is it, Basil? Sophie announced. Isa says we can make real Italian food with it. But first, we have to take care of it every single day and watch it grow. Taking care of things every day is important, EA added, her eyes meeting his with gentle significance. Growth requires consistency and attention, not just good intentions. The words hit him like a mirror, reflecting his own failures. How many times had he told himself he'd spend more time with Sophie tomorrow, next week, after the next big deal closed? How many moments had he missed while planning for a future that never quite arrived? Can I help? The question surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise them. Sophie's eyes widened. You want to garden in your nice clothes? Nathaniel looked down at his outfit, the most casual clothes he'd worn in years, but still too formal for sitting in morning wet grass. Maybe I need different clothes for this kind of work. Yeppe has old garden clothes, Issa suggested. If you're serious about getting dirty. 20 minutes later, Nathaniel found himself kneeling in Italian soil, wearing borrowed work pants and a sun-faded shirt that smelled like lavender and honest labor. His hands, more accustomed to keyboards and handshakes, fumbled with the delicate work of handling seedlings. Like this, Daddy. Sophie's small fingers showed him how to cradle the fragile roots without crushing them. You have to be gentle, but not scared. Plants know when you're afraid of them. How do you know so much about plants? Eel teaches me, she says. Everything alive wants to grow, but sometimes it needs help learning how. Nathaniel glanced at Isula, who was giving them space to work together while remaining close enough to guide when needed. There was something about her presence that made difficult things feel possible, that transformed his usual urgency into something more like patience. Miss Bennet, he found himself saying, Sophie seems to have learned a great deal in the short time you've been with us. Children are natural learners when they feel safe enough to make mistakes. She paused in her own planting, considering her words. Sophie is incredibly intelligent, but she's also been very careful, learning to trust her own instincts again. Children who lose a parent often become hyper-responsible. They try to be perfect so they won't cause any more loss or pain for the remaining parent. Aya's voice was gentle but clear. It's a heavy burden for a 5-year-old. The observation hit Nathaniel like cold water. Had Sophie been protecting him all this time? Had his grief-driven distance taught her that her needs were too much, her emotions too risky? Daddy, you're squishing the roots, Sophie observed matter-of-factly. He looked down to find his hands gripping the seedling with unconscious tension. Sorry, I'm still learning. That's okay. Isa says learning means making mistakes until you don't anymore. As they worked in companionable silence, Nathaniel's phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket. Clara business calls. The urgent demands of his other life pressing against this unexpected peace. But for the first time in years, he found himself able to ignore the electronic intrusions in favor of something more immediate. His daughter's patient instruction, AIA's quiet guidance, and the simple satisfaction of helping something grow. There, Sophie announced, as they finished transplanting the last seedling. Now, we have to water them every day, and give them sunshine, and tell them they're doing good. Tell them they're doing good. Plants like encouragement, Sophie explained seriously. Just like people. Nathaniel looked at his daughter, really looked at her, covered in dirt, glowing with accomplishment, teaching him about nurturing with the wisdom of someone who understood what it meant to need tending. When had she become so wise? When had he stopped noticing? Sophie, he said quietly, you're doing good, very, very good. Her smile was radiant enough to power the entire villa, and in that moment, kneeling in Italian soil with dirty hands and an open heart, Nathaniel realized he was beginning to understand what Isa had meant about presence being a choice you make moment by moment, not a destination you arrive at once and keep forever. The third day in Tuscany began with Sophie's delighted shriek echoing across the villa's courtyard. Nathaniel rushed from his morning coffee to find his daughter standing transfixed beside their small garden, pointing at what appeared to be a miracle. Daddy, look, our basil grew. Sure enough, tiny new leaves had emerged overnight, so small they were barely visible, but undeniably real. Sophie danced around the pot like she'd witnessed magic, which Nathaniel supposed that she had. Growth happens when we're not watching, Ella observed, appearing beside them with her own cup of Ypres-strong coffee. The real work happens in the quiet moments. Something in her tone made Nathaniel look at her more carefully. There were subtle signs of sleeplessness around her eyes, a thoughtfulness that seemed deeper than their plant-watching warranted. Everything all right? Of course. Her smile was automatic. Professional Sophie, should we water our new growth? But as the day progressed, Nathaniel found himself paying attention to things he'd never noticed before. The way Isa's laughter was always genuine when Sophie was the source, but sometimes seemed carefully constructed when adults were involved. How she deflected personal questions with the skill of someone who'd had practice, the way she held herself slightly apart, even in moments of connection. His phone had been mercifully quiet since yesterday evening, when he'd finally sent Clara a text explaining he needed a few more days to think. Her response had been politely concerned. Of course, darling, take all the time you need, though I confess I'm worried about you. Worried, as if wanting to spend time with his daughter was a symptom of some concerning illness. Dinner that evening was served on the villa's terrace, overlooking vineyards that stretched toward hills painted purple by the setting sun. Sophie, exhausted from a day of exploration, had fallen asleep in her chair despite Juspie's promise of gelato for dessert. I should put her to bed, Isola murmured, already rising. Let me. The words surprised Nathaniel, but felt right. I'd like to. Carrying Sophie's sleeping form up the villa's stone steps, feeling her complete trust as she settled against his shoulder. Nathaniel was struck by how rarely he'd been the one to provide this kind of comfort. Usually, Bedtime was handled by staff while he finished work calls or reviewed tomorrow's schedule. Sophie's room was on the second floor, with windows that looked out over the garden they'd planted together. As he tucked her under soft linens, she stirred slightly. "Daddy, I'm here. Are we going home soon?" The question carried weight beyond its words. "Would you like to go home?" Sophie considered this with the seriousness she brought to most questions. "I like it here. I like how you garden with me here. I like gardening with you, too. Will you still garden with me when we go home?" The question pierced him. At home, there were meetings to attend, deals to close, a carefully scheduled life that left little room for dirt under fingernails or watching basil grow. But looking at his daughter's sleepy face, trusting and hopeful, he found himself making a promise he wasn't sure how to keep. "Yes, we greater than LL, find a way." When he returned to the terrace, he found EA standing at the stone railing, her silhouette outlined against the star-filled sky. She'd changed from her daklo into something softer. A simple dress that moved with the evening breeze, her hair loosed around her shoulders. She settled easily. She did. Nathaniel joined her at the railing, accepting the glass of wine just had left for him. "She asked if we're going home soon." "And what did you tell her?" "That we'd find a way to keep gardening together." He paused, studying Issa's profile. "I'm not sure how to make that true. Maybe the question isn't how to fit gardening into your old life, but how to build a new life that has room for both." Spoken like someone who's made difficult changes before. Isla glanced at him, something vulnerable flickering across her features before she looked back at the stars. "Everyone makes changes. Some are just more visible than others." "What changes have you made?" For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. "Then I used to be engaged." The admission hung in the warm air between them, loaded with implications Nathaniel couldn't quite decipher. "Used to be 2 years ago. Bradley Hoffman. He's a surgeon in Boston. Very successful. Very appropriate." Her smile held irony. "We had everything planned. Spring wedding, house in Beacon Hill, children, on a suitable timeline. What happened?" "I realized that appropriate and right aren't the same thing." She turned to face him fully. "He loved me the way you love a beautiful painting, admired me, wanted to display me properly, took pride in owning me, but he never saw me, and that wasn't enough. I thought love was supposed to be comfortable, predictable, safe." She paused, her fingers tracing patterns on the stone railing. "Then I spent a weekend with my sister's family, watching her husband notice when she was tired, bring her coffee without being asked, laugh at her terrible jokes because he genuinely found her delightful. I realized I'd never experienced that kind of presence. Presence. That word that kept appearing in his life like a lesson he was meant to learn. "So, you called off the wedding." "I gave back the ring and took a job 3,000 miles away, working with children whose parents had forgotten how to see them." Her laugh was soft, dramatic maybe, but necessary. "Do you regret it?" "Never." The certainty in her voice was absolute. "Though I sometimes wonder if I'll ever find someone who sees me the way I need to be seen." They stood in comfortable silence, the night air carrying the scent of lavender, and the distant sound of night birds settling in the olive trees. Nathaniel found himself studying the woman beside him, really studying her, not just observing her competence with Sophie or cataloging her professional qualifications. E.A. Bennett was beautiful, but not in the polished, predictable way he was accustomed to. Her beauty was quieter, more complex, the kind that revealed itself in moments of genuine emotion, in the way she moved through the world with natural grace, in the intelligence that sparkled in her eyes when she was truly engaged. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Of course. What do you see when you look at me?" She turned to study him, her gaze direct and unnervously honest. "I see a man who's been so afraid of losing control that he's forgotten what it feels like to actually live. Someone who's built such strong walls that he's trapped himself inside them." The assessment should have stung, but instead it felt like relief to be seen clearly without flattery or agenda. "I see someone," she continued, "who loves his daughter desperately, but doesn't know how to show it because showing love requires vulnerability. And vulnerability feels dangerous to someone who's experienced real loss. And I see someone who's starting to remember that walls don't just keep pain out, they keep joy out, too." Nathaniel felt something shift inside his chest. A loosening of muscles he didn't realize he'd been holding tight for 3 years. "What about you?" he asked. "What do you want me to see when I look at you?" Issa was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. When she spoke, Her voice was barely above a whisper. I want you to see someone worth staying present for. The honesty in her words hit him like a physical force. Standing there under the Tuscan stars with his daughter sleeping peacefully upstairs and a woman who challenged everything he thought he knew about himself beside him, Nathaniel realized he was at a crossroads. He could return to New York, marry Clara, and resume the carefully controlled life he'd built from the ashes of grief. Or he could leap into the unknown, trusting that some kinds of growth required destroying the container that had kept you safe. As Isa's words echoed in the night air, Nathaniel understood that this wasn't just a vacation anymore. It was a choice between the life he'd planned and the life that was quietly, powerfully calling him home to himself. The morning of their 5th day in Tuscany arrived with unexpected chaos. Nathaniel woke to his phone buzzing with an urgency he'd almost forgotten existed. Harrison's name flashing insistently on the screen at 5:47 a.m. Sir, I apologize for the early call, but we have a situation. The words pulled Nathaniel immediately back into his other world. What kind of situation? The Morrison Industries deal is falling apart. They're threatening to pull out completely unless you're back in New York by tomorrow morning for an emergency board meeting. They're saying your absence indicates a lack of commitment to the partnership. Nathaniel sat on the edge of his bed, watching the sunrise paint the hills outside his window in shades of gold and amber. A week ago, this call would have sent him into immediate action mode. Now, it felt like an interruption of something precious and fragile. How much is the deal worth? $230 million plus the strategic positioning for the European expansion. $230 million. The kind of money that built empires and secured legacies, the kind of opportunity that didn't come twice. I'll call you back in an hour. Nathaniel ended the call and found himself walking to the window, looking out over the garden where he'd spent the past few days learning to be present. The basil plants he and Sophie had potted were thriving, their leaves broader each morning, reaching toward the light with the kind of faith he'd forgotten was possible. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Ashford, Isa's voice, carefully professional. Sophie's asking if you'll have breakfast with us before we explore the village today. He opened the door to find her fully dressed, hair pulled back every inch the competent caregiver he'd hired. But now he could see beneath the professional veneer to the woman who'd stood beside him under the stars, who'd trusted him with her story about choosing authenticity over security. Actually, I need to speak with you about our return schedule. Something shifted in her expression, a careful blankness that hadn't been there the night before. Of course, Sophie's still sleeping. We could talk now. They walked to the terrace where Yeppe had already set out coffee and fresh pastries, the domestic routine that had become comfortingly familiar. But today, the peaceful setting felt charged with unspoken tension. I received a call from New York. There's a business crisis that requires my immediate attention. Isa nodded, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. When do we need to leave? Today. This afternoon, if possible. The words hung between them like a door slamming shut. Azola was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. I see, it's a significant deal. The kind of opportunity that you don't need to explain. Her voice was calm, but Nathaniel caught something underneath it. Disappointment maybe, or resignation. I understand that business comes first. It's not that simple, isn't it? She looked at him directly, and he saw the walls going back up in real time. This is your life, Mr. Ashford. I was naive to think a few days in Italy could change that. Isa, I should pack Sophie's things. She'll be disappointed, but children are remarkably adaptable. She started to rise, but Nathaniel caught her wrist gently. Wait, please. For what? I don't know. The admission came out more raw than he'd intended. I don't know how to choose between a life I've built for 3 years and whatever this is. This, her eyebrow raised slightly. This feeling that I've been sleepwalking for years and just started dreaming again. Isa settled back into her chair, but her posture remained guarded. Nathaniel, I told you about Bradley because I wanted you to understand that I know what it's like to choose security over authenticity, but I also know what it costs. What did it cost you? Everything that mattered. The ability to trust my own instincts. The belief that someone could love me for who I am rather than who they need me to be. 3 years of wondering if I'd thrown away my one chance at a stable life. Do you still wonder that? No. Her answer was immediate, certain, because I learned that a stable life, built on the wrong foundation, isn't stable at all. It's just an elaborate way of hiding from yourself. Before Nathaniel could respond, Sophie's voice rang out from inside the villa. Daddy Isa, come see. The butterfly is out. They found Sophie in the garden, crouched beside a chrysalis they'd been watching for days. A monarch butterfly sat on a nearby lavender plant, its wings still damp and crumpled from emergence, slowly expanding in the morning sun. "Look how beautiful she is," Sophie breathed. "Isa, you were right about the changing. She's completely different now, but still herself," Isla murmured, kneeling beside Sophie. "Just more herself than she was before." Sophie looked up at her father with shining eyes. "Daddy, are we like butterflies, too?" The question pierced him. "What do you mean, sweetheart? Are we changing into what we're supposed to be?" Nathaniel crouched beside his daughter, this wise 5-year-old, who seemed to understand transformation better than he did. "I think maybe we are good," Sophie nodded solemnly, "because I like who we're becoming here." The simple statement hit Nathaniel like a revelation. Sophie had noticed the change. In 5 days, they'd become something different together. More present, more connected, more real, and she liked who they were becoming. His phone buzzed. Harrison again. The business world calling him back to responsibilities and obligations and the life he'd carefully constructed from the ashes of grief. But looking at Sophie's hopeful face, remembering Isa's words about choosing authenticity over security, Nathaniel realized he was facing the same choice Isa had faced 2 years ago. Safety or truth, control or trust, the life he'd planned, or the life that was calling him home to himself. "Sophie," he said carefully, "what if I told you we might need to go home today?" Her face fell so completely it was like watching light go out today. "But we were going to see the village and water our plants, and Jeppy promised to teach me how to make real pasta." "I know something came up with work." "Work always comes up." The words came out with matter-of-fact sadness that broke his heart. "It's okay, Daddy. I understand." But she didn't understand. Not really. She was 5 years old, accepting disappointment with the resignation of someone who'd learned not to expect too much. Someone who'd learned that work would always come first, that adult promises were conditional, that love was something that happened when it was convenient. Nathaniel looked at EA, who was watching this exchange with carefully controlled emotion. He thought about Clara waiting in New York with wedding plans and appropriate expectations. He thought about the Morrison deal worth enough money to secure Sophie's future 10 times over. And then he thought about his daughter asking if they were becoming butterflies, and how she'd said she liked who they were becoming here. The choice was no longer between business and pleasure, security and risk. It was between the man he'd been and the man he was discovering he could still become. Nathaniel stared at his phone, Harrison's name flashing for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Around him, the Tuscan morning continued its peaceful rhythm, bees humming in the lavender, Sophie gently coaxing the newly emerged butterfly onto her finger, Isla standing nearby with walls back up, but eyes still holding fragments of hope she was trying to hide. $230 million. Sophie's financial security, his reputation, everything he'd worked to rebuild after Margaret's death. Against all of that, a 5-year-old's disappointment that she was trying to hide, a woman who'd shown him what presence looked like, and the terrifying possibility that he could be someone different than who he'd been for the past 3 years. The phone stopped ringing, started again immediately. "Aren't you going to answer that?" Isa asked quietly. "Probably." Nathaniel looked at the screen, then at Sophie, who was whispering encouragement to the butterfly as it tested its wings. "Sophie, can you come here for a minute?" She approached with the careful obedience he was beginning to recognize as her way of protecting herself from further disappointment. "Sweetheart, I need to make a very important phone call. And before I do, I need to know something. Okay? If you could choose, if you could have anything you wanted, what would you want our life to look like?" Sophie considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. "You mean like wishing I would wish?" She paused, glancing at Isula, as if seeking permission to want too much. "I would wish that you could garden with me every day, and that we could cook together sometimes, and that you would read me stories before bed." Not just Mrs. Henderson. Each wish was like a small arrow to his heart, so simple and so reasonable, and so completely outside the life he'd built for them. "And I would wish," Sophie continued, her voice growing smaller, "that you would stay when I asked you to stay instead of always having to go to work." "Anything else?" Sophie looked at Azula again, then back at him. "I would wish that Isla could stay, too, because she makes you smile the way Mommy used to." The observation was so innocent and so devastating that Nathaniel felt something crack open in his chest. This 5-year-old had noticed things he'd been afraid to acknowledge, that Isa brought out parts of him he'd thought were buried with Margaret. That joy was still possible. That love didn't have to be rationed like a finite resource. His phone rang again. This time, he looked directly at Isla as he answered. "Harrison, sir. I've been trying to reach you. Morrison Industries is threatening to walk. They need confirmation of your return by noon our time, or they're moving forward with Blackstone Capital instead. I understand, sir. We need you back today. This is everything we've worked toward for the European expansion. Nathaniel watched Sophie return to the butterfly, watched Isla pretend not to be listening while obviously hanging on every word. Harrison, how long have you worked for me? 15 years, sir. Since just after you married Mrs. Ashford. In all that time, have you ever known me to make a decision lightly? No, sir, never. Then, trust me now. Call Morrison Industries and tell them that Nathaniel Ashford sends his regrets, but he has more important business to attend to. The silence on the line was so complete, Nathaniel thought the call had dropped. Sir, I'm not sure I understand. Are you saying you want to postpone the meeting? I'm saying I want to cancel it permanently. Morrison can work with Blackstone if they need a partner who jumps when they call. I'm not that man anymore. Mr. Ashford, with respect, this is a $200 million decision. Perhaps you should take some time to think. I have been thinking for 5 days. I've been thinking more clearly than I have in 3 years. Nathaniel found himself smiling, a sensation that felt like remembering how to breathe. Harrison, I'm taking an extended leave of absence, effective immediately. An extended, sir. You can't be serious. Dead serious. Promote Jennifer Chen to acting CEO. She's been ready for years. And frankly, she'll probably do a better job than I have lately. Set up a transition meeting for when I return to New York. When will that be? Nathaniel looked at Sophie, who had stopped pretending not to listen and was staring at him with eyes wide with hope she was afraid to trust. I don't know. We're still figuring some things out here. After ending the call, Nathaniel found himself in complete silence, except for the sound of his own heartbeat and the distant buzz of Italian countryside life. Sophie and Isa were both staring at him like he'd just announced he could fly. Daddy, Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. Does that mean we can stay for now? He crouched to her level. This brave little girl who'd been protecting herself and him for far too long. Sophie, I need to tell you something important. I've been a terrible father. No, you haven't. Yes, I have. Not because I don't love you. I love you more than all the stars in the sky. But because I've been so afraid of losing you that I forgot how to be present with you. Sophie's lower lip trembled. Are you going to learn how? I'm going to try. Will you help me? Instead of answering, Sophie launched herself into his arms with the kind of fierce hug that reminded him she was still small enough to need him, still young enough to believe he could change. Over Sophie's shoulder, he met Isa's eyes. The walls were still there, but behind them, he could see something that looked like cautious amazement. That was a very expensive phone call, she observed. The most expensive one I've ever made. He stood, Sophie, clinging to his neck. I know you have every reason not to trust this. I know I could wake up tomorrow and panic about what I just did. You could, but I also know that 5 days ago, I was planning to marry a woman I respected but didn't love. To give my daughter a stepmother she didn't need. To live a life that felt safe but hollow. He paused, searching for words adequate to the moment. And now I can't imagine going back to being that man. What kind of man do you want to be? The kind who keeps his promises to his 5-year-old daughter. The kind who chooses presence over productivity. The kind who's brave enough to admit that maybe the life he thought he wanted isn't the life that will make him happy. Isa was quiet for a long moment, and Nathaniel could practically see her weighing his words against her experience with men who made grand gestures that didn't last. And what about us? She asked finally. What about whatever this is between us? I don't know, he admitted. I know that you make me want to be better than I am. I know that watching you with Sophie shows me what love in action looks like. I know that talking to you feels like coming home to a place I didn't know I was looking for. Nathaniel, I'm not asking you to trust me completely. I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove that some people really can change, that some transformations are permanent. Sophie pulled back to look at him. Like the butterfly? Exactly like the butterfly, sweetheart. And as the three of them stood in the Italian sunshine, with a newly emerged butterfly testing its wings nearby, and the sound of Sophie's laughter beginning to fill the air again, Nathaniel realized that some choices don't feel like choices at all. They feel like coming alive. The village of Montepulciano clung to its hilltop like a medieval dream, all stone buildings and narrow cobblestone streets that had witnessed centuries of human stories. Sophie skipped ahead of Nathaniel and Isla, her small hand trailing along ancient walls, completely unaware that she was living through one of those stories that would change everything. Gelato, she announced, spotting a small shop with hand-painted signs. Yep, I said, the pistachio here is made from real Sicilian nuts. It was their 7th day in Tuscany, and Nathaniel was beginning to understand that time moved differently here. Not the urgent, segmented time of quarterly reports and board meetings, but something more organic. Time measured by Sophie's discoveries, by conversations that meandered like the hillside paths, by the gradual unfurling of possibilities he'd forgotten existed. 2 scoops of pistachio, and 1 vanilla, he told the shop owner, in carefully practiced Italian, earning a delighted grin from Sophie. Daddy learned Italian words, she announced to Isula, as proud as if he'd mastered quantum physics. I noticed, Isa smiled, and Nathaniel caught something different in her expression. Less guarded than it had been since his phone call with Harrison, more like the woman who'd stood beside him under the stars. They found a small table in the village square, where fountains bubbled, and elderly men played chess with the intensity of generals planning battles. Sophie attacked her gelato with systematic precision, while Nathaniel found himself studying the scene with new eyes. A week ago, he would have been checking his phone, calculating how to maximize this tourist experience for minimal time investment. Now he was simply here, present in the way Isla had described, available to whatever the moment offered. Penny, for your thoughts? Isla asked, following his gaze across the square where children played an elaborate game involving chalk and running. I was thinking about time, he said. How I used to measure my life in productivity units, and now I'm learning to measure it and I don't know what to call them. Moments of connection. Maybe Sophie's teaching you that you both are. He paused, watching his daughter attempt to communicate with a local child through the universal language of smile and gesture. Can I ask you something? Of course. What happens when we go back to New York? The question hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they were ready to cross. Isa was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the cafe table. I suppose that depends on what you want to happen. Nathaniel found himself struggling with words, not because he didn't know what he wanted, but because wanting it felt like stepping off a cliff. I want to build something real with you, with Sophie. I want to learn how to be the kind of man who chooses love over fear, presence over productivity. And Clara, the name hit him like cold water. Clara waiting in New York, with engagement, expectations, and social calendar, obligations, and all the reasonable assumptions she'd built around their relationship. I have to end it with Clara, obviously. He paused, the weight of that conversation settling on him. She doesn't deserve to be anyone's second choice. And she definitely doesn't deserve to marry someone who's realized he's been sleepwalking through their entire relationship. That won't be an easy conversation. No, but it will be an honest one. For the first time in 3 years, I'm going to tell someone the complete truth about what I want. Sophie bounced back to their table, her face sticky with gelato and glowing with adventure. There's a girl over there who speaks English. Her name is Emma, and she's from London, and she taught me how to say beautiful in Italian, Bella. Everything here is Bella. Everything, EA asked, smiling. The flowers are Bella. The buildings are Bella. The food is Bella. Sophie paused, looking seriously at both adults. And our family is Bella too. Our family. The words hit Nathaniel with unexpected force. When had Sophie started thinking of them as a family? When had 3 separate people become something cohesive, something that belonged together? Sophie, he said carefully, when you say our family, what do you mean? You and me and I, she replied matter-of-factly, like how Emma has her mommy and daddy, and they take care of each other. Nathaniel felt Illa's attention sharpen beside him, but when he glanced at her, she was watching Sophie with something that looked like protective tenderness. And you want Illa to be part of our family. She already is, silly. She takes care of us, and we take care of her, and we all like being together. That's what families do. The innocent certainty in Sophie's voice made Nathaniel's chest tight with emotion. His 5-year-old daughter had identified something he'd been afraid to name. They had become a family unit, something organic and functional, and surprisingly right. Isa, he said quietly, how do you feel about Sophie's definition of family? For a moment EA looked genuinely vulnerable, all her professional composure stripped away. I feel like it's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said to me, beautiful enough to be worth trying to build something real around. Nathaniel, she began, then stopped. I need you to understand something. I don't want to be Sophie's nanny who you happen to be attracted to. I don't want to be the convenient solution to your childcare needs. What do you want to be? I want to be the woman you choose because you can't imagine your life without me. I want to be Sophie's, I don't know what to call it. Stepmother feels too clinical, but someone who loves her as if she were my own. And I want to be the man who proves that some people really can change, Nathaniel said, reaching for her hand across the table. The man who chooses love over logic, who builds a life around what matters instead of what looks good on paper. Sophie, who had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention children bring to conversations about their future, suddenly piped up, "Are you talking about getting married?" The question hit the table like a small bomb. Nathaniel and Isula looked at each other, then at Sophie, then back at each other. "Would you like us to get married?" Isa asked gently. "Only if you love each other the way Mommy and Daddy used to love each other," Sophie said seriously, with the looking at each other like you have secrets, and the laughing about things that aren't really funny, and the hugging even when nobody's sad. Nathaniel felt his heart stop. "You remember that? You remember how Mommy and I were together?" "I remember the feeling," Sophie said, like our house was full of invisible sparkles. Invisible sparkles. Nathaniel thought about his marriage to Margaret, the easy intimacy, the shared jokes, the way they'd moved through life as true partners. Then he thought about his relationship with Clara. Respectful, appropriate, devoid of any sparkles, visible or otherwise. "Sophie," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "do you think our house could have invisible sparkles again?" She looked between him and Isula with the solemnity of a judge rendering verdict. "I think it already does, Duddy. You just have to decide if you want to keep them." As they walked back through the village toward their car, Sophie running ahead to examine everything with delighted curiosity, Nathaniel found himself holding Isa's hand without remembering when they'd reached for each other. "She's right. You know," Isa said quietly about the sparkles, "I can feel them, too. Even though I'm terrifying, even though I might wake up tomorrow and panic about throwing away my entire carefully planned life. Especially because of that." She squeezed his hand. "Because choosing love when it's easy isn't really choosing. Choosing love when it requires courage, that's when you know it's real." As they drove back toward the villa through countryside that had become the backdrop for their transformation, Nathaniel realized that the most important question wasn't whether he was brave enough to change his life. It was whether he was brave enough to trust that the life changing him was exactly the one he was meant to live. The call came at 6:23 a.m. on their 9th day in Tuscanuni, shattering the peaceful morning like glass against stone. Not Harrison, this time, not business, but Clara's name flashing on Nathaniel's phone with an urgency that made his stomach clench. He answered on the third ring, stepping out onto the villa's terrace to avoid waking Sophie and Isa. "Clara." "Nathaniel." Her voice was crisp, controlled, but underneath he could hear something he'd never heard before, real emotion. "I'm in Florence." "You're what?" "I flew in last night. I'm at the Four Seasons. We need to talk." The words hit him like cold water. Clara Reeves had never done anything impulsive in the entire time he'd known her. She planned weekend trips months in advance, scheduled spontaneity into her calendar, approached life with the methodical precision of a Swiss watch. "Clara, I can explain. Can you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, my fiancé." "Yes, Nathaniel. We may not have been officially engaged, but we both knew where this was heading. Disappeared to Italy with his daughter's nanny and has been unreachable for over a week." "How did you know where I was?" "Your assistant was worried enough about your mental state to share your location. Apparently, turning down a $250 million deal raised some red flags about your decision-making capacity." Nathaniel closed his eyes, imagining Harrison's panic, the corporate gossip mill, spinning stories about his sudden breakdown, the careful, professional reputation he'd built crumbling in real time. "I'll meet you in Florence this afternoon." "No." Clara's voice was sharp. "I'm coming there. I've already hired a car. I should arrive by noon." The line went dead, leaving Nathaniel staring at his phone in the Italian sunshine that suddenly felt less warm. Behind him, he heard the villa coming to life, Yepa's cheerful morning preparations, Sophie's sleepy questions about breakfast, Ella's gentle responses. The world they'd built here, fragile and new, and more real than anything he'd experienced in years, was about to collide with the life he'd left behind. "Everything all right?" Isa appeared beside him, wearing a simple sundress and carrying 2 cups of coffee, her hair loose and catching the morning light. She looked beautiful and natural and completely unprepared for what was coming. "Clara's on her way here." EA went very still, her expression carefully neutral. "I see. She flew to Florence last night. She'll be here by noon." "That's unexpected." That's Clara realizing she's losing control of a situation she thought she had managed. Nathaniel accepted the coffee gratefully, needing something to do with his hands. "Isa, I want you to know you don't owe me explanations. Yes, I do. He turned to face her fully. 9 days ago, I was planning to propose to a woman I respected but didn't love. Today, I'm trying to figure out how to tell that same woman that I've fallen in love with someone else. Nathaniel, let me finish, please. He sat down his coffee, needing his hands free to gesture, to somehow make his words carry the weight of what he was feeling. I know this is complicated. I know it looks like I'm some middle-aged man having a crisis and making impulsive decisions that will hurt everyone involved. Are you? Maybe. Probably. But I also know that in 9 days, you and Sophie have shown me what it feels like to be alive again. What it feels like to be present instead of just managing my existence. Issa was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. What are you going to tell her? The truth, that I've been sleepwalking through our relationship, that she deserves someone who sees her the way she needs to be seen, and that's not me. And what about us? I'm going to tell her that I've fallen in love with a woman who makes me want to be better than I am. A woman who's taught my daughter how to laugh again and taught me what presence looks like. Before Ika could respond, Sophie appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her hair a tangle of sleep musk curls. Why are you talking so seriously? She asked, her 5-year-old radar picking up the tension in the air. We're just discussing some grown-up things, Issa said gently. Are you hungry for breakfast? Yes, but first Sophie looked between them with the focused attention that usually preceded her most important observations. Are you sad about something? Nathaniel crouched to her level. Not sad, exactly, but remember how we talked about how sometimes grown-ups have to have difficult conversations, like when you told Harrison you didn't want to work so much anymore. Exactly like that. Well, I need to have another difficult conversation today with Clara. Sophie's face grew serious. The lady you are going to marry. Yes. But you're not going to marry her anymore, right? Because you love Isla now. The innocent directness of the question took Nathaniel's breath away. How did you know that? Because you look at her the way you used to look at Mummy with the sparkles. Sophie paused, considering. And because Issa looks at you the same way, like you're both keeping the same happy secret. Nathaniel glanced at Isla, who was watching this exchange with tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. You're right, he said simply. I do love Isla. And I love you too, Sophie, announced matter-of-factly. So when Clara comes, you should tell her that we're already a family now, and families stick together. The words hung in the morning air like a declaration of independence. Sophie, in her infinite 5-year-old wisdom, had distilled their complex situation down to its essential truth. They had become a family, and families choose each other. 2 hours later, they heard the car coming up the villa's long driveway. Sophie was in the garden with Yeppe, learning to harvest tomatoes and blissfully unaware of the adult drama about to unfold. Ella had retreated to her room, giving Nathaniel space for what promised to be the most difficult conversation of his life. Clara emerged from the hired car looking exactly like herself, perfectly put together despite the long journey. Her blonde hair smoothed into its signature shape, her outfit chosen to convey both elegance and subtle disapproval. She looked around the villa's grounds with the expression of someone examining a crime scene. So, this is where you've been hiding. I haven't been hiding. I've been. Nathaniel searched for words that could possibly explain the transformation of the past 9 days. I've been remembering how to live. Clara's laugh was sharp, humorless. How dramatic. And I suppose the nanny is part of this newfound life philosophy. Her name is Isula. And yes, she is. I see. Clara's composure cracked slightly, revealing the hurt underneath. Well, at least you're being honest. Finally, they sat on the terrace where he'd spent the morning with Ike, where he'd shared coffee and quiet conversation, and the kind of easy intimacy he'd forgotten was possible. Now, facing Clara's wounded anger, that piece felt like something from another lifetime. Clara, I owe you an apology. Yes, you do. I've been unfair to you. I've been going through the motions of a relationship without being honest about what I was feeling, or more accurately, what I wasn't feeling, and what weren't you feeling, Nathaniel? He looked at this woman who had been nothing but appropriate, nothing but exactly what he'd thought he wanted, and felt the weight of his own cowardice. Love, he said simply. I wasn't feeling love. The word hung between them like a door closing on one life and opening to another. And in the silence that followed, Nathaniel realized that some truths once spoken change everything forever. The silence, after Nathaniel's confessions, stretched between them like a chasm. Clara sat perfectly still, her manicured hands folded in her lap, her expressions cycling through hurt, anger, and something that might have been relief. Love, she repeated finally, her voice hollow. You weren't feeling love. No. And you deserve so much better than that. Do you think I'm stupid, Nathaniel? The question came out sharp, surprising them both. Do you think I didn't notice that you were going through the motions? That our conversations felt like business meetings? That you never looked at me the way? She stopped, her composure cracking. The way what? The way you looked at Margaret. Clara's admission came out raw, unfiltered. I knew I was never going to be her. I accepted that. I thought maybe what we had would be enough. Respect, compatibility, shared goals. Clara, no, let me finish. She stood abruptly, pacing to the terrace railing. I convinced myself that passionate love was for people who couldn't handle mature relationships. That what we had was better because it was reasonable. Nathaniel watched her struggle with truths she'd been avoiding just as carefully as he had. But seeing you here in this place, she gestured at the villa, the gardens, the life he'd been building. Even from a distance, I can see you're different, more alive, more present. The word hit him like an echo of every conversation he'd had with Issa about what it meant to really show up for life. I am different because of her, because of both of them. Sophie and EA, they've shown me what I was missing. Clara turned back to face him. And for the first time since he'd known her, she looked completely unguarded. Can I meet her? The woman who managed to wake you up. The request surprised him. You want to meet Isla. I want to understand what love actually looks like when it's real. Before Nathaniel could respond, Sophie's laughter rang out from the garden, followed by Yeppy's delighted chuckle in a voice he'd come to treasure. Ella's warm encouragement as she helped his daughter with whatever adventure they discovered among the tomato plants. She's in the garden with Sophie. They walked together toward the sound of laughter, and Nathaniel found himself seeing the scene through Clara's eyes. Ela kneeling in the dirt despite wearing a white sundress. Sophie perched on an upturned crate with soil under her fingernails and pure joy on her face, Yeppe beaming at them both like a proud grandfather. It was chaotic and imperfect and utterly beautiful. Daddy Sophie spotted them first, jumping down from her crate. Look what we harvested. Yeppe says these tomatoes will make the best sauce in all of Tuscany. She held up a basket of irregularly shaped, gloriously ripe tomatoes, as proud as if she'd created them herself. They're beautiful, sweetheart. Sophie looked curiously at Clara, taking in the elegant woman's perfectly coordinated outfit and careful posture. Are you Clara? Yes, I am. Clara's voice was gentler than Nathaniel had ever heard it. You must be Sophie. Daddy was going to marry you, but then he fell in love with Isola instead. Sophie's matter-of-fact delivery of this bombshell made everyone freeze. Are you sad about it? The innocent directness of the question hung in the air like a challenge. Clara looked at Sophie. Really looked at her perhaps for the first time, and something shifted in her expression. You know what, Sophie? I thought I would be sad, but seeing how happy your daddy is, and how happy you are, I think maybe this is how things were supposed to work out. Issa had been hanging back, giving them space, but Sophie's next words pulled her into the conversation. EA, this is Clara. She's very pretty and nice, but Daddy loves you more because you make the sparkles happen. If the ground could have opened up and swallowed him, Nathaniel would have welcomed it. But instead of the awkwardness he expected, Clara actually smiled. The first genuine smile he'd seen from her in months. Sparkles, she asked. The invisible kind, Sophie explained seriously. When people love each other the right way, their house gets full of invisible sparkles. Ella makes them happen for Daddy. Clara looked at Isla, really studying her for the first time. What she saw was a woman with dirt on her dress and flowers in her hair, and eyes full of love for both the man and the child standing nearby. I can see them, Clara said quietly. The sparkles, they're not invisible at all. Issa stepped forward then, her natural grace making the introduction feel less like a confrontation and more like a meeting of equals. I'm sorry, she said simply. I never intended for any of this to happen, didn't you? Clara's question wasn't accusatory, just curious, because looking at the three of you together, it seems like this was always supposed to happen, like you were waiting for each other. The observation hung in the air, profound in its simplicity. Nathaniel realized that Clara was seeing what Jusby had seen, what even Sophie had understood instinctively, that some families aren't planned, they're recognized. Clara, he said carefully, I know this isn't how you imagined. No, it's not, she interrupted. but her voice held acceptance rather than bitterness. I imagined a marriage that looked perfect from the outside, with a man who would never surprise me or challenge me or make me feel things I couldn't control. She paused, looking around at the chaotic beauty of their makeshift family moment. But watching you here, seeing how Sophie looks at both of you, understanding what real love actually looks like, Clara's voice grew stronger. I realized I don't want to be anyone's safe choice anymore. I want to be someone's adventure. The words hit Nathaniel with unexpected force. Clara wasn't just releasing him, she was releasing herself from the prison of appropriate expectations they'd both been living in. You deserve that, he said. You deserve someone who sees you as their greatest adventure. Yes, I do. Clara straightened, her natural composure returning but warmer, somehow, more human. And you deserve this. Whatever this beautiful chaos is that you've built here. Sophie, who had been listening to this adult conversation with the focused attention children bring to moments that will shape their future, suddenly piped up. Does this mean you're not sad and we can all be friends? Clara laughed, a real laugh, not the carefully modulated sound Nathaniel was used to hearing. I think that's exactly what it means. Sophie, as the afternoon sun slanted across the terrace, they found themselves sharing an impromptu meal. Yepes tomato sauce made from Sophie's harvest, bread still warm from the village bakery, wine that tasted like sunshine and second chances. Clara told stories about her work that Nathaniel had never heard, revealing a sense of humor and passion he'd never seen. Isa shared her dreams of maybe opening a school someday, working with children who needed someone to see their potential. Sophie regaled them all with detailed explanations of butterfly metamorphosis and the proper care of basil plants. And Nathaniel watched it all with the kind of gratitude that comes from understanding how close you came to choosing the wrong life entirely. As evening approached and Clara prepared to return to Florence, she pulled Nathaniel aside for a final conversation. I'm going to tell people that we mutually decided we weren't right for each other, she said. No drama, no scandal, just two people who figured out they wanted different things. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just, she paused, looking back at EA and Sophie, who were showing Yepa how to make friendship bracelets from garden twine. Just, don't waste this. What you have here is rare. I know, do you? Because I spent 2 years with you, Nathaniel, and I never once saw you look the way you look when you watch them. Like they're your whole world. The observation hit him with the force of absolute truth. They are my whole world. Then protect it. Fight for it. Choose it every single day. Not just when it's easy. As Clara's car disappeared down the villa's driveway, Nathaniel found himself standing in the garden with his real family, the one he'd found by accident and chosen with intention. Sophie was chasing fireflies while Isa watched with that smile that made his chest tight with gratitude. How do you feel? She asked, moving to stand beside him. Free, he said simply. For the first time in 3 years, completely free. And what do you want to do with your freedom? Nathaniel looked at this woman who had changed everything, who had shown him what love looked like when it was chosen rather than managed, who had given his daughter back her laughter and given him back his life. I want to build something real with you. Something that grows from the ground up like Sophie's basil plants. Something that gets stronger with time and attention and daily choosing. Even if it's messy and unpredictable and nothing like the life you planned. Especially then, as Sophie's laughter filled the twilight air and Isa's hand found his in the growing darkness, Nathaniel realized that some transformations aren't just about becoming someone new. Sometimes they're about becoming who you were always meant to be. 2 years later, the garden behind their brownstone in Brooklyn Heights was nothing like the rolling hills of Tuscany, but it held its own magic. Nathaniel could see it clearly from the kitchen window as he prepared Saturday morning coffee. Sophie, now 7 and wiser than most adults he knew, carefully tending to the herb garden she'd insisted they plant the moment they'd moved in. Remember, basil needs encouragement, she was explaining seriously to her newest gardening partner, 4-year-old Emma Chen, whose mother had become one of Ila's closest friends since they'd returned to New York. You have to tell it, it's doing good, just like people. Isa appeared beside him at the window, her hair still mussed from sleep, wearing one of his old Columbia t-shirts and a smile that never failed to make his chest tight with gratitude. She's going to have Emma's entire preschool class believing that plants have feelings, she observed, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. Is that such a bad thing? Nathaniel leaned into her warmth, still amazed after 2 years that this was his life. Saturday morning coffee, garden wisdom from his daughter and the woman he loved, sleepy and content against his back. Not at all. The world could use more people who believe in the power of encouragement. Through the window, they watched Sophie demonstrate the proper technique for watering seedlings while Emma listened with the rapt attention of someone receiving state secrets. The little girl's parents, David and Linda Chen, sat on the garden bench Nathaniel had built last spring, sharing their own coffee and the comfortable silence of people who'd found their tribe. The brownstone had been Isa's suggestion when they'd started house hunting 18 months ago. Sophie needs space to grow things, she'd said. And you need a place that feels like home instead of a museum. She'd been right, as usual. The house was nothing like his sterile Manhattan penthouse. It was warm and lived in and full of the kind of beautiful chaos that happened when people actually used their space for living. Daddy, Ella. Sophie's voice carried through the open window. Come see. The butterfly bush is getting visitors. They found themselves in the garden moments later. Sophie pointing excitedly at the cluster of monarchs that had discovered their carefully cultivated butterfly sanctuary. Emma stood transfixed, her small hand reaching toward the dancing orange and black wings. Just like in Italy, Sophie breathed, her voice full of wonder that hadn't dimmed despite seeing this miracle dozens of times. Just like Italy, Nathaniel agreed, though he was looking at EA rather than the butterflies. The transformation hadn't been instant or easy. Those first months back in New York had been an exercise in conscious choice-making. Every day he'd had to choose presence over productivity, connection over control. He'd had to learn how to run a company without letting it run his life, how to be a father without scheduling it into time slots, how to love a woman without trying to manage the relationship like a business merger. EA had been patient with his learning curve, firm about her boundaries, and endlessly creative in helping Sophie adjust to having a father who was actually present. She'd officially left her position as Sophie's nanny 6 months after their return, taking a job at a progressive elementary school in Park Slope while they figured out what their family was going to look like. The engagement had happened on a Tuesday night in their kitchen, Sophie covered in flour from an ambitious cookie-making project, Isa laughing at something ridiculous Nathaniel had said about the proper chocolate chip distribution technique. No ring, no grand gesture, just a sudden clarity that this was the moment, this ordinary, perfect, completely chaotic moment. Marry me, he'd said, the words coming out before he'd consciously decided to say them. Isa had gone very still, her flour-covered hands frozen in mid-gesture. Are you serious? Completely serious? Marry me because I can't imagine my life without you. Marry me because you make me want to be better every single day. Marry me because Sophie already considers you her second mom and I want to make it official. What about me? Sophie had piped up from her position on the counter, where she'd been eavesdropping with the focused attention of someone whose future was being decided. Do I get a say in this? What do you think? Isla had asked, crouching to Sophie's eye level. I think Daddy should have asked both of us, because we're both going to marry you. The wedding had been small, just family and close friends in the garden they'd built together, Sophie serving as both flower girl and ring bearer. Because she'd insisted that traditional roles were too limiting for a modern family, Clara had come, bringing her new boyfriend, a marine biologist, who looked at her like she was the most fascinating creature he'd ever discovered. Even Harrison had attended, now running the company with the kind of innovative thinking that came from actually trusting your employees. Now, watching Sophie teach Emma about the patience required for growth, Nathaniel marveled at how far they'd all come. His daughter was thriving in her new school, where her tendency to ask profound questions was seen as a gift rather than a disruption. Asa had been promoted to head of the early childhood program, spending her days helping other children learn to trust their own curiosity, and he'd discovered that stepping back from the relentless pursuit of more had actually made him more successful in the ways that mattered. The company was thriving under his more collaborative leadership style. But more importantly, he went to bed each night knowing he'd been present for the people who mattered most. Earth to Nathaniel, Isa's voice brought him back to the present moment. The butterflies are beautiful, but you're staring into space. Just thinking about how Sophie was right that day in Tuscany. We really did turn into butterflies. All of us. All of us. He pulled her closer, not caring that David and Linda were watching with the indulgent smiles of people who'd witnessed their friend's love story from the beginning. We went into our chrysalis as separate people who were just trying to survive, and we came out as a family. Daddy Sophie appeared beside them with the uncanny timing children had for interrupting important moments. Emma wants to know if we can start a butterfly garden at her house, 2. What did you tell her? That butterflies need flowers, and flowers need people who will take care of them every single day, even when it's not exciting. Sophie paused, considering her words with the seriousness she brought to all important matters, and that the most beautiful things happen when you're patient and present. Instead of trying to hurry everything up, Nathaniel looked at his 7-year-old daughter, this wise little person who'd somehow absorbed life lessons that had taken him 40 years to learn, and felt his heart expand with a gratitude so vast it was almost painful. That sounds like excellent advice. I learned it from you and Isa, Sophie said matter-of-factly. You taught me that love isn't something that just happens, it's something you choose to do every day. As the afternoon sun slanted through their Brooklyn garden with butterflies, dancing among flowers that Sophie had planted with her own small hands, Nathaniel realized that some transformations don't have ending points, they have growing points, and every day, in small acts of presence and choice, and tending to what matters, they were all still becoming exactly who they were meant to be together. Thank you for following Nathaniel, Isa, and Sophie's journey. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories aren't about finding someone perfect. They're about finding someone who makes you want to become the best version of yourself. What did this story teach you about the difference between love that's chosen and love that's simply convenient? Would you have the courage to choose authenticity over security, like both Nathaniel and EA did? Your participation in our channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below, letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.